All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, how did the teams in the NFC fare in the 2023 NFL Draft? For me, first and foremost, the Philadelphia Eagles hit a home run. And you wonder why the Eagles got to the Super Bowl last year and why they have been a perennial title contender for some time now. Guess what? They know what they are doing on draft day. Two first round picks this year from Philly. They got the defensive lineman out of Georgia and Jalen Carter, and then they also got his teammate and linebacker Nolan Smith. And I mean, of course, I talked about this after the first round. Obviously, Jalen Carter, his stock fell due to some off the field issues, but nonetheless, there is talent there. And then you look at Nolan Smith, his stock fell after the injury. He would have been a top 15 pick without it. But now the Eagles are stout, and because they already have depth on that side of the ball, they don't have to rush these young men on, which means that you know what? You have an opportunity to develop these guys properly in your system. Taking another Georgia defender in the fourth round in cornerback Keely Ringo. And you think about what this Georgia defense was on the college football scene over the last couple of years as they won back-to-back national championships. Philadelphia now has five players from that defense once you account for defensive tackle Jordan Davis and linebacker N'Kobe Dean, who were taken in last year's draft. So you might as well start to call them the Philadelphia Bulldogs because that's basically what they were. It's been a busy, couple of weeks for the Philadelphia Eagles. We saw them work out the contract extension with quarterback Jalen Hurts recently. And then during this draft, acquiring running back DeAndre Swift, another former Georgia Bulldog from the Detroit Lions. And you look at it, for me, what were the Lions thinking? I mean, you already lost Jamal Williams, who after gaining 1,000 yards on the ground, he signed with the Lions last year. He signed with the New Orleans Saints. You now trade DeAndre Swift. I know you drafted Jameer Gibbs. I get it, but you're trading him within the NFC, and this is a team that you have to contend for the postseason for this coming year. Not a good look, in my opinion, for Detroit. The Dallas Cowboys, I talked about this after the first round. They missed out on tight end Dalton Kincaid in round number one. Buffalo just came in and snuck up right in front of them and took Kincaid, the tight end out of Utah. But I like what Dallas did in round number three, getting linebacker DeMarvion Overshawn from the University of Texas. The bottom line is Overshawn is an athlete and he's a football player and he's going to get after you. And I think he's going to make an impact for this Cowboys team here as a rookie. Also, I love what Dallas did in the sixth round. They got themselves a steal in K-State running back Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn should have been gone long before he was taken, but it was just one of those scenarios. His height scared people off, but the bottom line is he can play. He is tremendous in space, and I guarantee you he is going to be a factor along with Tony Pollard in that Cowboys backfield for the coming season. Now, the New York Football Giants, they overachieved last year, in my opinion. And because of that, their general manager, Joe Shane, has really taken this time to really upgrade this roster. The Giants are going to continue to be a playoff team as they got to try to keep up with both Philly and Dallas in the NFC East. This is the real process for me as far as Shane's development of this roster. And I love what the Giants have done already this offseason. You go out there and make the trade for Darren Waller, a tight end, to help your quarterback, Daniel Jones, who you just re-signed. You go out there and sign former Rams defensive lineman Ashawn Robinson. Now you use a first round pick on Maryland cornerback Deontay Banks, who is a good press corner. And it's a scenario where you think about Wink Martindale's defense. It relies on putting your corners on an island. So you need guys out there who can press and cover. I think Deontay Banks definitely fills that void. Getting more depth on the offensive line. The process of rebuilding the Giants offensive line began last year for Joe Shane and head coach Brian Daboll. You go out there in the second round and pick up John Michael Schmitz, the center out of the University of Minnesota. Then you turn around and round number three, if you're in New York, and you take Tennessee wide receiver Jalen Hyatt. And I think Jalen Hyatt has the potential to be an impact player for the Giants from day one. Rather, he's a great hands catcher of the ball, and he knows how to make separation at the line of scrimmage. And I think he's going to become a favorite target very quickly of quarterback Daniel Jones. Now, for the Seattle Seahawks, John Snyder and Pete Carroll are two of the best as far as running a draft room. And we saw that again this weekend. Seattle came into the draft in possession of two first round picks. They used the first on cornerback Devin Witherspoon and the second on wide receiver Jackson Smith and Jingba. And I think both of these guys are going to be impact players for Seattle. You think about it. If you're the Seahawks, you got to get through the 49ers in order to win the NFC West. San Francisco is loaded at the skill positions, and you need guys who can cover, especially a cornerback like Witherspoon. Jackson Smith and Jingba, if it wasn't for the injuries, would have been a top 10 pick. And now I think he's going to have a big time impact as he plays off of veteran wide receiver DK Metcalf and the Seattle offense. You look at Seattle in the second round, they go out there and get UCLA running back Zach Charbonnet. And one thing about Pete Carroll, he loves to run the football. Yes, you drafted Kenneth Walker last year out of Michigan State. Now you have more depth at the running back position. And a guy like Charbonnet is a very hard and angry runner. And I think he's going to have an impact for the Seahawks team as a rookie. Then, Seattle went back and got another running back late in this draft when they took Georgia running back Kenny McIntosh. And just because of where he fell, I think McIntosh could be one of the steals of this draft. Had fourth or fifth round talent, fell to Seattle in the seventh round, and I think he's going to be a player for the Seahawks as a rookie. The Carolina Panthers had the first overall pick. They got their franchise quarterback in Bryce Young, but they're going to be a work in progress as they look to put the pieces around him. I talked about the Lions trade with the Philadelphia Eagles, sending DeAndre Swift to Philly. But nonetheless, the Lions did get themselves some football players in this draft. You take Jameer Gibbs, 12th overall, the running back out of Alabama. It was a surprise for some people to see Gibbs go that high, but he does have home run hitter potential at the running back position. And then you come back and you get Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell a little bit later in the first round. This, like I said the other night, this is a Dan Campbell type pick. Jack Campbell is a paint swapper, and he has that old school NFL linebacker mentality to him. And I think this is a guy that's going to be a stalwart for years to come on this Lions defense. The Lions stayed with the Iowa theme, went and got tight end Sam Laporta in round number 2, and of course we saw Detroit trade T.J. Hawkinson during the regular season last year to the Minnesota Vikings. They had a void at the tight end position. Sam Laporta can come in and fill that void as he looks to catch passes from quarterback Jared Goff. Detroit took quarterback Hendon Hooker in the third round, and of course Hooker is not going to be available for the most part this season, as he's recovering from that ACL injury. And nonetheless, you got Jared Goff at quarterback if you're the Lions. So you could take your time in trying to develop Hendon Hooker and see what you have potentially a couple of years down the road. Now, the Chicago Bears are a work in progress as they look to build around quarterback Justin Fields. But drafting offensive tackle Darnell Wright in the first round was definitely a step in the right direction as far as getting things turned around in the Windy City. The Green Bay Packers drafted 13 players as the post Aaron Rodgers era has begun. Of course, the highlight was Lucas Van Ness in round number 1. Isaiah Foskey, the edge rusher, going to the New Orleans Saints in round number 2 could be a steal. To me, I thought Foskey had the potential to sneak into the first round rather. New Orleans got him there in the second round, and I think he could be an impact player for the Saints. And then the Saints weren't done there with steals, in my opinion, as they got Wake Forest wide receiver A.T. Perry in the sixth round, a big wide receiver. He separates more than people want to give him credit for. And you went out there and made the signing of Derek Carr. Now you got to go out there and give him more weapons to throw to on the offensive side of the ball. So for me, winners and losers, and I know I didn't talk about all of the teams from the NFC, but nonetheless, winners and losers for this draft process from the NFC. The Eagles definitely hit it out of the park. And like I said, the Philadelphia Bulldogs continue to be the head of the class. Solid drafts for both Dallas and the Giants. And I know that Dallas has not had the postseason success probably in the last 25 years or so that they really wanted. But nonetheless, I really feel in the last 10 years or so, the Cowboys have done a pretty good job as far as drafting. They just have been unable to get over the hump in the postseason. And of course, a lot of that comes back to the quarterback position. For the Giants, like I said, it's a solid draft, and you got to do this if you're the Giants in order to be able to keep up with Dallas and Philadelphia in the NFC East. The Seahawks as well hit it out of the park. Tremendous drafting once again by Pete Carroll and John Schneider as they know what they're doing as far as developing the roster in the way that they want. A solid draft for the Lions. And this is going to be important because the NFC North is up for the grabs. Aaron Rodgers is gone. What are the Vikings going to do? Can the Lions, take that next step? They were on the cusp of making the playoffs last year and fell just short. You look at Green Bay, will they take a step back? And of course, the Chicago Bears are rebuilding. So somebody has got to step up and win this division. Maybe it could be the Lions. We got to wait and see. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're definitely in rebuild mode as the post Tom Brady era has begun for them. This could also be a rebuild year for the Packers. The Cardinals, they got Kyler Murray taken care of for his long term deal. But they're looking towards the future. We saw Arizona move back in this draft. They moved from 3 to 12 and then back up to number 6. First, making the trade with the Houston Texans, who took Will Anderson, and then, of course, making the trade with the Detroit Lions as Arizona got their offensive tackle. But nonetheless, the Cardinals have begun the process of stockpiling picks for next year's draft as they could be a very active team. So basically, you know what? It's all about, getting the players signed that you've drafted, looking at the undrafted free agents. There's plenty of talent out there. Of course, if you're the Lions, you went out there and you've already signed former Minnesota running back Muhammad Ibrahim. And this guy right here is another one of those guys. He's a football player. I know he had some injuries. Um, during his time in Minnesota. And of course, if it wasn't for the injuries, he would have been drafted. But nonetheless, if you're the Lions, you got to love that. Daniel, what's going on, my man? And I definitely agree with you. Seattle absolutely crushed this draft. And I'm going to hit back on something real quick. And I'll say it. I love Jackson Smith and Jingba falling to them late in the first round. That right there, I think he is going to be a guy that if he's healthy this year, he's definitely going to be in the discussion for offensive rookie of the year. You think about what the Ohio State wide receivers have been in the NFL in recent years when they've come out. And I think Jackson Smith and Jingba is definitely going to add to that, a very versatile receiver. And it's one of those, if you're an opponent of the Seahawks and you're trying to stop them passing the football, who do you double? That's the bottom line. Because if you want to focus and bring that safety over to DK Metcalf, guess what? Jackson Smith and Jingba will burn you if he's healthy. But nonetheless, I think this was a solid draft by some of these teams on the NFC side. Some teams definitely hit it out of the park. It wasn't the deepest draft like we've seen in recent years. But nonetheless, I feel that teams still had a good opportunity to find players that fit their respective systems. And that's what it's all about. It's about getting the fit. You're saying Njingba is a great fit for wide receiver number 3 and an amazing slot guy, which is what they need. Absolutely. I mean, you put it like this. If an opponent of the Seahawks goes nickel coverage and he's in that slot, you got a problem. And Geno Smith's not going to be Lamar Jackson back there in the pocket, but nonetheless, Geno can still scramble around enough. And if he can scramble around and have a little scramble drill going on out there, especially in second and third down scenarios, Jackson Smith and Jing was going to catch that rock and he's going to do things with it. We haven't even talked about who Seattle used the first pick in the first round on. And of course, that was cornerback Devin Weatherspoon out of the University of Illinois. And of course, that's the pick right there that the Seahawks got in the one of the picks rather that the Seahawks got in the Russell Wilson deal. And I talked about this last year. A lot of people looked at Pete Carroll sideways after he made that deal, but obviously Pete Carroll and John Schneider knew what they were doing. And it's not just about getting draft picks. It's about using them properly, whether you use it to draft players, or you use it as part of a trade package, to set things up. You're saying Spoon was a shocking pick, but I'm excited for him. It's one of those where there were rumors maybe Seattle would have went Jalen Carter right there. Obviously, I think the off the field issue scared a lot of teams off. But nonetheless, I think Devin Witherspoon can still have an impact on the team because, like I said before, it's a scenario. If you're Seattle and you want to win the NFC West, you got to go through San Francisco right now. And you look at the talent that the 49ers have amassed at the skill positions. I know that San Francisco did not have a deep draft this year due to all of the trades that they've made in recent years. They've basically become the new LA Rams because of that. So you got to be all in for this season if you're San Francisco. But nonetheless, with all of that talent at the skill position, if you're Seattle, you got to try to match that talent. And of course, if you look back to Seattle's wild card loss last year to San Francisco, they were right there for the majority of the game. Maybe, just maybe, this is the draft class that will allow Seattle, maybe not this year, but in a following year, to kind of overtake San Francisco for the top spot in the NFC West. And remember, you go back to when Pete Carroll first, became the head coach of the Seahawks. He made some moves in the draft that raised some people's eyebrows, but the bottom line is Pete Carroll knew what he was doing. And you go back about 10 years now, when Seattle won that Super Bowl, they had a very deep team at the time, and especially on the defensive side of the football. And you go back, and if you think about that Super Bowl where they beat Denver, they just came at you in waves as far as the pressure that they were able to create and the talent that they had in the secondary. Now, Pete Carroll is rebuilding that defense, and obviously it's not in the Legion of Boom mode, if you will, because listen, right off the bat, I think Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas are probably going to be Pro Football Hall of Famers. It's very difficult to replace Hall of Fame talent at whatever position that you're trying to, but nonetheless, you could still go out there and get quality players that fit your system. And I think that is what Seattle is doing. Kobe Bryant was a part of that rookie class last year for Seattle. He's definitely, you know, a guy that's going to be in the Seahawks' long-term plans for his potential. And I think some of the guys like Witherspoon and Jackson Smith and Jigba, could be part of that as well. And then again, like I said before, Kenny McIntosh, you get him in the seventh round out of Georgia. And of course, Georgia has produced some quality NFL backs over the years. It's one of those where by the time they come to the NFL, they're not worn down because typically Kirby Smart and of course before him Mark Rick, he usually had like a couple of running backs that they would tote out there at a time to keep all of them fresh. So nonetheless, I think, Kenny McIntosh going to Seattle that late in the process is definitely going to be a steal. You're saying it's crazy to think that our Super Bowl win was 10 years ago. Honestly, things go by real quick. It happens. I mean, I think back to my time in high school when it was all about the 49ers, it was all about the Dallas Cowboys. And nonetheless, you look at the Cowboys and how long ago was that, that they didn't let, like, since it's been since they won a championship. And it's the same thing for the San Francisco 49ers. Seattle's been there. Yes, they've had their ups and downs, but, there's a possibility that they can get back. We got to see if it's going to be this year or in the coming years. But nonetheless, this is why you draft and you draft well to get to that point. So we got OTAs for the rookies right around the corner, the rookie mini camps. And then before you know it, it's going to be training camps all together. So let's see how many of these players that were taken this weekend will definitely be impact players for their respective clubs for the upcoming season. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, If you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Daniel, I definitely appreciate you checking in, and I definitely appreciate your comments in the chat box. I'll be back on here tomorrow talking about the draft and the AFC side, so you're more than welcome to chime in on that. And I got a lot of football stuff to be talking about in the next week or so. I plan to be talking about the Arizona Cardinals heading into next year's draft. So stay tuned for that. And I also plan to be talking about some of the potential impact players for the 2024 NFL draft, led by USC quarterback Caleb Williams and Ohio State wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. So definitely stay tuned. TFX, how are you doing? And you hit it right on the head. And I'll touch on this very quickly. You said the Eagles will be tough to beat. And I talked about this a little bit earlier this evening. It's a scenario where this is why you draft. And the Eagles were one of the deepest teams in the NFL last year. And that's a big reason why um, they were in the Super Bowl last year. Obviously, it fell short for them against the Kansas City Chiefs, and a big reason for that was, in spite of all of the pressure that they had been able to generate throughout the season, they couldn't do squat against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they couldn't get to an injured Patrick Mahomes, which was why they didn't win that game. But nonetheless, the rich got richer. You made that trade with the New Orleans Saints. You got their first round pick, which was a top 10 pick. You swapped picks with Chicago to move up one slot. You get Jalen Carter, and then you come back and get Nolan Smith. And then on top of that, what people aren't going to talk about enough, the Eagles are already great as far as running the football. Now you go out there and pick up DeAndre Swift from the Detroit Lions. That's going to be another big impact move for the Eagles. And I know, it's still April technically, but nonetheless, you got to put them in the mix to not only win the NFC East potentially for the upcoming season, they potentially can get back to the Super Bowl once again. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, once again, my name is William Martin. Thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well. Thanks again, and have a good one, folks.